With The Bridge on the River Kwai, I went into it not knowing much about it, but having at least heard of the movie and having known it was a classic. But this one, I had never even heard of it. My initial reaction to it, though, was, oh shit, another movie that's over 150 minutes? What the hell? I settled in, though, and ended up engrossed. Has anyone else that's watching or listening to the show ever got into a soap opera? Because this is the movie equivalent to that.
You like soap operas?
Welcome back to The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be continuing to rank all the Best Picture nominees ever, and we'll find out what the best movie for each year and all time are. For those of you that are new to the show, the agenda for the episode is I go over some facts and tidbits that I found out about the film that I call the Potent Notables. Then I'll do the movie overview, which is as described, an overview of the movie. And then we'll finish it up with The Rank, the namesake of the show, where I rank the movie in 10 categories on a scale of 1 to 10. And today I'll continue the 1957 nominees, with the next one being Peyton Place, the 1957 Best Picture nominee starring Lana Turner, Hope Lange, Lee Phillips, Lloyd Nolan, Diane Varsi, Arthur Kennedy, Russ Tamblyn, and Terry Moore, with a screenplay written by John Michael Hayes that was adapted from the novel by Grace Metalious and directed by Mark Robson. It was nominated for 9 Academy Awards and won none. Yikes. That's tough. It was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Supporting Actress for Diane Varsi and Hope Lange, Best Supporting Actor for Arthur Kennedy and Russ Tamblyn, Best Actress for Lana Turner, Best Director for Mark Robson, and of course, Best Picture. Now, if you're enjoying these rankings or you just want to find out what will be the best movie ever nominated for Best Picture or even just the best of each year, please subscribe and or follow, like the video, comment. You can reach out to me directly at info@therankpodcast.com. I will respond to your emails, whether they're questions, suggestions, comments, whatever. And if you super duper like it, please consider becoming a patron on our Patreon site at patreon.com/therankpodcast. Now, so far, 1957 has been a good year with 12 Angry Men sitting on top with a 91.5 and The Bridge on the River Kwai below it at an 86.75. Of course, those are probably the two most well-known of the nominated movies of that year, and the Academy got it wrong again, but will 12 Angry Men remain on top? Let's find out how Peyton Place ranks among the all-time and for its year, starting with the Potent Notables.
Potent Notables.
So as always, we start the Potent Notables with the box office info, and according to IMDb, Peyton Place grossed a worldwide total of $25.6 million, and this was against a budget of $2.2 million, so a pretty big hit. Now, the first question I asked myself after watching the movie was, where did they film this? It turns out it was mostly filmed in Camden, Maine, and a little bit in the surrounding areas of Camden, like Rockport. But yeah, I now want to visit that town. Now, off topic, but I've been to a bunch of national parks in my life across the country, but I think my favorite is actually Acadia in Maine. I'm curious, what about you all? Comment your favorite national park below. I think it'll be kind of fun because anyone who doesn't actually listen to or watch this will be like, why are there national parks written in the comments?
Well, that sounds fun.
All right, so here's a kind of wild Potent Notable. Selena Cross's character was based on a real woman who killed her father. Her name was Barbara Roberts, and she also had a younger brother whom she raised after her mother's death. When she was 17, she shot and killed her father while he was threatening both her brother and her. They ended up burying his body in their New Hampshire farm's pig pen. Now, where it differs from the real life story, sadly, and spoiler alert upcoming, is that she was tried and convicted of a second-degree murder. Later, when it became known that she had been sexually abused by him for years, her conviction was lessened to manslaughter, but not overturned. I'm glad they decided not to go with that ending in this movie, because that's really depressing. Also, originally Metalious, the author of the novel, wrote Selena as actually being Lucas's daughter, but her editor felt, quote, the American public wasn't ready for full-on incest. Okay, are they ready now?
What a strange question.
Now, the patricide connections continue here as Lana Turner, who played Allison Mackenzie's mother Constance, had a mobster boyfriend in real life who was murdered by her daughter. This story ended up getting fictionalized and turned into a movie as well, and guess who wrote that screenplay? Yep, John Michael Hayes, the same guy who adapted this one, so it's pretty wild. Now, I found this one and just thought it was kind of fun. Immediately after the graduation scene, there's a quick scene showing Allison Mackenzie at a typewriter. Now, she's in the same pose that Grace Metalious, the author of the novel, is on the back of the paperback version. So the detail is exact, right down to the position of her body and clothing. Just thought that was kind of interesting. And speaking of Allison, there were a lot of young actresses in line for the role. Susan Strasberg was initially set to play Allison. However, when she upped her salary, she was fired. For a short period, Debbie Reynolds was set to replace her. Eventually, 20 famous actresses were screen tested before the unknown Diane Varsi got the role. And finally, if anyone does want to travel to Camden, Maine after watching this movie, you can actually download a map of filming locations from the local library's website, or you can stop at the local library, as I'm sure you can pick it up there too. I just thought that was kind of cute. All right, let's go to the movie overview. With The Bridge on the River Kwai, I went into it not knowing much about it, but having at least heard of the movie and having known it was a classic. But this one, I had never even heard of it. My initial reaction to it, though, was, oh shit, another movie that's over 150 minutes? What the hell? I settled in, though, and ended up engrossed. Has anyone else that's watching or listening to the show ever got into a soap opera? Because this is the movie equivalent to that.
You like soap operas?
I don't know that anyone's going to say that a soap opera is prime art, but you give a soap opera enough time and it will absolutely get you absorbed. When I was a kid, I had a babysitter that would watch Days of Our Lives during nap time, and I never slept at nap time, and that definitely became my show. I remember looking forward to watching that and The Price is Right whenever I stayed home sick from school. Well, the same can be said for this movie. It pulled me in the same way. Peyton Place is the name of the fictional New England town, and we get a slice of life of that town from the perspective mostly of the high school graduating class of 1941. The main characters are Allison and her mom Constance, or Connie, her best friend Selena, Selena's mom, drunkard stepdad, and little brother Joey, the coolest and richest kid in school, Rodney, his girlfriend and his father's foreman's daughter, Betty, Allison's love interest, Norman, the town doctor, Dr. Swain, and finally the new principal, Mr. Ross. It's like the Avengers of teenage angst. Now, when you introduce this many main characters, you're making it a lot harder on yourself to engage the audience because it's hard for the audience to get enough information on everyone to give a shit about them. But I cared about every single one of them. Now, the narration is done from the perspective of Allison, whom I thought was kind of vanilla for the first part of the movie, then whiny and petulant for the latter part, but I ended up coming around to her point of view by the end. I want to talk about what happens in this movie, but I don't want to spoil it for everyone. What really shocked me about this movie was the topics that it discussed. I mean, we're having pretty open discussions about sex and with teenagers. This is 1957, so it was ahead of its time. Not only that, but it has feminist undertones with the acknowledgement of the difficult position women were in at the time. It doesn't drive that home as strong as it could have, but I have to give it kudos for the attempt. Allison even has a line in it where she tells her erstwhile love interest that he has to understand that girls want to do the same things and have the same urges as boys. In a time where women were expected to be almost lustless and demure, this feels like kind of a big idea to put on the big screen. I mean, Allison's mother says the thoughts of the time kind of perfectly with a line in the movie that kids will find out about sex, quote, when they're married. All right, so I gotta tell you some spoilers. There's gonna be some spoilers ahead. The movie gives us an uneasy impression of Selena's home life and especially her drunkard stepdad right away. Her older brother Paul's leaving home and the stepdad, Mr. Cross, who is drunk in every scene but one, comes out drunk and then has a lingering hand on Selena's shoulder after Paul leaves. It was a little charged and made me uneasy, but I thought, this is 1957. They're not gonna go there, right? But later, we see him watching her change leeringly. I still thought, okay, they're making an implication that he's a creep, but that's as far as it will go. But no, he rapes her on screen. It's not as graphic as maybe that scene would be now in this day and age, but damn, if it wasn't alarming and disturbing anyway. On top of all that, this encounter ends up getting poor Selena pregnant. Now, during the pregnancy announcement to the audience, we get some stuff that was definitely more of the times, with the doctor, Dr. Swain, saying, it's okay that you're pregnant, you can just get married. It's fine. But Selena is reluctant to tell who the father is, and Dr. Swain basically browbeats her into telling him. And when he finds out who it is, he ends up giving her an abortion. It was blowing my mind that a movie that came out in 1957 would depict an abortion on screen. And I'm sure you can tell that by these standards, everyone else's story in here sort of paled in comparison. Like, you know, Allison and Rodney and Betty and Constance. Like, you know, Selena's story is definitely the most gripping. For instance, there was a will they or won't they dynamic between Allison and Norman, and the fraying relationship between Allison and her mother. There was a will they won't they between Mr. Rossi and Allison's mom Connie, and another will they won't they between Rodney and Betty because Rodney's dad, the rich guy in town who owns the mill, makes Rodney break up with Betty because she's below his station. I'm sure you can see how this is very soap opera-y at this point. So this movie is a coming-of-age tale, a treatise on the dangers of rumor mongering, a love story, a lesson on the importance of sex education, and an ode to reconciliation. It was an epic on the smallest scale, and yet it felt large. It had me watching it hoping for every good outcome for all the characters. It didn't give me all of them, but enough. It caught me off guard and delighted me, but the question is, how will it rank? Let's find out.
A rank.
So the rank is where I rank the movie based on 10 categories: story, acting, originality, film coherence, cinematography, score/soundtrack/sound, script structure and dialogue, character relatability, production value, and my rank. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And before I get started on the rankings, I just want to say if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help us. It helps the podcast grow. But our first category is story, which I gave an 8.5. There's really a lot of stories here with a lot of characters. I think it's not higher for me because the main story feels like it shouldn't be the main story. Selena's story is the one that is really the focus, but for some reason the movie wants you to care about Allison's story more. I didn't, and I was fine with her story, but hers was definitely more of a petulant teenager than Selena's. So let's go to acting, which I gave a 7. The actors got me invested in the characters. They certainly made me emotional sometimes, but there's a lot of overacting in it as well. It's really not bad, it's just not subtle. And maybe acting doesn't have to be subtle, but when it's not subtle, you feel like you're watching a movie instead of seeing lives being lived. So let's go to originality, which I gave a 9.5. This feels like a pretty groundbreaking and progressive piece of work for its time. I was shocked when they had the principal talk about having a sex ed class and asking where else are they going to learn it. I mean, there was an abortion in the movie. Had that been done before? I think they pushed the envelope with this movie and they did it as if it was hidden in a 1950s aesthetic of stereotypically normal lives. It was cool. So let's go to film coherence, which I gave an 8.75. It was more about a place than a person. And I know that's an obvious statement, but the reason I'm saying it is because I think it may have been a little more coherent if it had just focused on Selena. That being said, I think it would have been a harder pill to swallow if it wasn't seen through the lens of more normal coming of age issues to see past the idol. Still though, I think it could have been a little shorter. I will say there was one part that confused me as to why it was in there, and that was the Miss Thornton stuff. It's right in the beginning. She didn't get picked for principal, and that was sad, and then we were done with her. I assume she had more of a role in the book. I don't know. But let's go to cinematography, which I gave an 8.5. I thought the cinematography was really good in this. I liked the way they framed things. They would have things off center when you wouldn't expect it, but it made it more impactful because of it. I just thought they made good choices when they could have made generic ones or bads. So let's go to score/soundtrack/sound. I gave that a 5.5. Now the score wasn't necessarily bad, it was just distracting and it didn't seem to fit. Like when Selena is getting chased through the woods by her rapist stepfather, it almost sounds jaunty. But when Allison runs away from her party and goes upstairs, it is incredibly dramatic and way too loud. Actually, often the music cuts in at a much higher volume than it should and is often more dramatic than the situation requires and not dramatic enough in others. It's not all the time or every situation, but with an over 2.5 hour runtime, you can't help but notice them. So let's go to script structure and dialogue, which I gave an 8.5. It was really good, but at times it got too literary with its dialogue. There were definitely times where they had people say things that people wouldn't say, but that an author would write. Flourishes are nice, but it always brings me out of it a little bit. Now, if it's too full of itself, it really does, but this one wasn't that. It definitely got me invested in the characters. So let's go to character relatability, which I gave a 9. I think they're all pretty relatable. It's interesting to see life back then. We really thought that falling in love in high school was like legitimate love. Like the parents were like, yeah, they might be in love. I felt like the teenagers and the reactions to their problems felt very true. Selena was incredibly relatable. Allison was a little petulant, but ultimately relatable. I would have liked to have seen a little more development of Norman because he just felt like a sad sack to me. But let's go to production value, which I gave a 9.5. This was really excellent. I couldn't bring myself to give it a perfect score because it feels like they just picked the right town. But even so, you really get the feel that they're trying to present. It felt very authentic. I think the only thing I can think of specifically that felt off was the courtroom that looked like it belonged to a much bigger city. So let's go to my rank. I gave it an 8.5. Just like a soap opera, it sucks you in if you watch long enough. It's funny because if someone were to ask me if this was a great movie, I don't think I'd say yes, but I really enjoyed it. It's one of those movies where you keep being like, is this good as you're watching it? And yet you can't help being invested in it. I don't know that I would have ever watched this movie if I hadn't been doing this podcast, so I'm glad I'm doing it. So altogether, that puts Peyton Place at an 83.25, which makes it an I'd watch it again. So it did end up below The Bridge on the River Kwai and 12 Angry Men, but still a really decent score, and it's in the top 3 tiers. So thanks for listening and or watching, everybody. If you'd like to see a list of my updated Best Picture Series rankings, you can do that on our website at therankpodcast.com. Remember to subscribe, review, and comment. Please consider supporting us on our Patreon site at patreon.com/therankpodcast, where you'll get access to all of our archived episodes. And just as a reminder, please like the episode if you enjoyed it. It really does help us out. And in true Peyton Place fashion, I'm leaving you with a scandal. My sudden disappearance. Goodbye. I feel like that's why they made the movie the way they did, to see past the idyll. I'm just gonna make sure that I'm pronouncing that word right.
Spoiler alert, you're not.